Book 1, The Blazing Ronin, Wandering Blades. Chapter 1, The Wandering Blade. The rising sun cast an orange glow over the quiet village, its rays glinting off the finely crafted katana blade resting across Akira's lap. He sat cross-legged in a secluded grove of bamboo, finding rare solace in the morning's tranquil stillness before the day's inevitable chaos began. Lighting up the joint he rolled, so he can calm his nerves. A masterless samurai, a Ronin, Akira had been wandering the lands for nearly a year since his lord's death at the hands of a rival clan. With no master left to serve, he took odd jobs where he could, guarding merchant caravans, protecting villages, or hunting down petty criminals. He earned just enough coin for simple meals, his ganja, and a night at the roadside inns that dotted the countryside. But his nomadic existence was beginning to weigh heavily on him. The faint snap of a twig made Akira's eyes open, his warrior senses instantly alert. His calloused hand gripped the katana's worn hilt as a young farmer stumbled into the grove, eyes wide with panic. "Please, honorable samurai, you must help," the farmer gasped between frantic breaths. "A band of ruthless bandits have descended on our village and taken everyone hostage. They are demanding payment we simply cannot afford." Akira studied the man for a moment, his brow furrowed. Another plea for his aid, another cry for justice. With a solemn nod, he sheathed his deadly blade and stood in one fluid motion, dusting off his tattered hakama pants. "Lead the way," Akira said, his voice low but resolute. As they hurried through the dense forest underbrush, plumes of black smoke began rising over the treetops. Akira's jaw tightened, hoping they weren't too late to save the villagers from whatever atrocities awaited. They emerged at the village's edge to find the main road lined with still bodies. Farmers and their families lay scattered, some clutching gruesome wounds while others stared lifelessly at the morning sky. The acrid stench of burnt wood and death hung heavy in the air. Rage burned in Akira's chest at the senseless slaughter. "You there, samurai," a gruff voice called from the village center, cutting through the eerie silence. "Drop your sword now and maybe I'll let you live, unlike these pathetic fools." Akira's grip tightened on his katana's hilt as he scanned the area, eyes narrowing. Akira's grip tightened on his katana's hilt as he scanned the area, eyes narrowing at the source of the taunting voice. A large brutish man swaggered out from behind a burning hut, a wicked grin spread across his face. He was flanked by a dozen or so more bandits, each armed with an assortment of crude weapons. Well, if it isn't a noble samurai come to save the day," the brute sneered, resting a heavy spiked club over his shoulder. "I'm going to enjoy putting that fancy sword to good use once I pry it from your dead fingers." The young farmer beside Akira fell to his knees, trembling in fear. But Akira remained still and focused, giving no outward reaction to the bandit's threat. His years of training allowed him to suppress the anger boiling inside. Plus he was stoned, keeping him calm. "I will give you one chance to collect your men and leave this village at once," Akira said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Refuse, and you will join these innocents in death," he said as he pulls a joint out of his pocket and began to light it up. The bandit leader threw his head back and laughed, the sound like grating metal. "Did you hear that, boys? The samurai gave us a chance to leave." His men joined in the mocking laughter, gripping their weapons tightly. The brute locked eyes with Akira, his grin turning menacing. "I think it's time you re-evaluated your situation, samurai. You're alone, outnumbered, and facing the Crimson Butchers, the most feared bandits from here to the western shores. We were just about to have our fun with the few survivors." He nodded towards a group of terrified villagers, mostly women and children, bound and huddled together near the village well. A few of his men began advancing on the defenseless captives, leering hungrily. "So I'll ask you one last time," the brute said, taking a step forward. "Walk away and live. Or throw away your life in a futile gesture and join these villagers in hell." Akira's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched tightly. His hand slowly drew his katana from its sheath, the razor-sharp blade hissing against the wood. He took a defensive stance, feet planted and sword held before him. "I was born a samurai," he said, his voice low but resonating with conviction. "And I'll die before I allow the innocent to suffer at the hands of filth like you." The brute's grin vanished as he gripped his spiked club with both hands. "You just signed your death warrant, samurai." The brute bandit leader twirled his spiked club menacingly as his men fanned out, slowly encircling Akira. The masterless samurai remained calm, his feet planted shoulder-width apart and his katana held horizontally across his body. "Last chance to walk away, samurai," the brute growled. "My men are getting antsy to spill your guts." Akira gave no response, his intense gaze fixed on the bandit leader as he took a puff of the joint. In a flash, he whipped his sword up in a defensive salute, the razor-sharp blade catching the morning sun's glint. "So be it," the brute snarled. "Kill him." Two bandits charged forward, rusted machetes raised high. Akira remained still until the last possible moment before moving with blinding speed. His katana sang through the air, parrying the first machete strike while his other hand lashed out, open-palmed into the second bandit's face. Bone crunched as the man's nose shattered, dropping him to the ground in a heap. Akira pivoted and in one fluid motion brought his katana around in a horizontal arc, slicing clean through the other bandit's raised machete and deep into his chest. The man's eyes went wide before he crumpled, unmoving. "Who's next?" Akira called out, his voice intense but calm as he reset his stance. The remaining bandits looked at each other uneasily for a moment before letting out a guttural war cry and charging in a wave of steel and bloodlust. Akira centered himself, his sword becoming an extension of his being as he waited for the first strike. The dance of death had begun. From her place among the captive villagers, a young woman named Kaya watched in awe and terror as the lone samurai began cutting down their attackers one by one. His katana was an emerald blur, striking with a combination of raw power and elegant precision. Bandits fell around him in pieces, screaming in agony until their voices were abruptly silenced. Kaya had never seen such a beautiful yet terrifying display of martial skill. The brute leader roared in rage, charging in with his spiked club held high. Akira saw his approach and threw himself into a sideways roll, narrowly avoiding the bone-crushing blow that caved a deep crater into the hard-packed earth. As the brute struggled to regain his footing, Akira sprang up behind him, his bloodied katana raised high. As the brute bandit leader struggled to regain his footing, Akira sprang up behind him, his bloodied katana raised high overhead with both hands gripped tightly around the hilt. With a primal shout, he brought the razor-sharp blade down in a powerful overhead arc aimed at the back of the brute's exposed neck. But the large man managed to whirl around at the last second, using the momentum of his spiked club to just barely deflect Akira's strike with a deafening clang of metal on metal. The katana's edge bit deep into the club's shaft, sending a spray of wooden splinters across the bandit's face. Snarling, the brute used his greater bulk to bull rush forward, driving his shoulder squarely into Akira's midsection. The unexpected impact drove the wind from the samurai's lungs and sent him staggering back several steps. Seizing the opportunity, the bandit leader raised his club high once more, aiming to bring the spiked weapon down in a skull-crushing blow. But Akira managed to recover quickly, dropping into a crouch and swinging his katana up in a vicious upward slash. The finely honed blade caught the brute's weapon squarely, slicing straight through the middle of the club's shaft. The severed top half went spinning off harmlessly as the bandit froze, stunned by the display of swordsmanship. In that split second of vulnerability, Akira pivoted and unleashed a devastating roundhouse kick, his booted foot slamming squarely into the side of the brute's knee joint. An anguished roar tore from the man's throat as the impact shattered his kneecap, dropping him to the ground in a crumpled heap, clutching the ruined limb. Akira rose to his feet, katana at the ready as he turned to face the last few remaining bandits. But the pitiful men had seen enough and were already fleeing into the forest, their fallen comrades left behind. A deathly hush fell over the village as the young samurai stood victorious amid the carnage. His chest heaved from exertion, eyes slowly scanning the shocked faces of the freed villagers. The young woman named Kaya could only gape in awe at Akira, her eyes traveling over the various nicks, cuts, and blossoming bruises that modeled his muscular frame. His hair had come loose from its top knot, hanging in sweaty strands over his intense eyes. In that moment, he looked every bit the mythical warrior from the tales of old that her grandfather used to tell. Kaya felt an unfamiliar warmth rising within her at the sight of this mysterious, handsome samurai who had just single-handedly saved their village from certain doom. The moment was broken as the village elder pushed his way through the crowd, eyes wide with disbelief at the scene of butchered bandits. He looked up at Akira, mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Finally, the old man found his voice and addressed the bloodied warrior. I do not know who you are, noble samurai. But you have performed a great service for our people today, one which we can never repay. I do not know who you are, noble samurai, the village elder said, eyes wide at the carnage around them. But you have performed a great service for our people today, one which we can never repay. Akira gave a solemn nod, sheathing his bloodied katana. I am Akira, a Ronin, a masterless samurai. I was simply passing through when your man found me and told of your village's plight. The old man's eyes widened further. A Ronin? But, your skill with the blade, it is like nothing I have witnessed before. You moved with such speed and precision, like the warriors of legend. A few villagers began murmuring in agreement, staring at Akira with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The young woman named Kaya could not tear her gaze away, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. You honor me with your praise, Akira replied with a respectful bow of his head. But I was merely following the code instilled in me since birth, to live with honor, and protect the defenseless from evil men who value only chaos and self-interest. The elder opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a pained groan from the crumpled form of the bandit leader. All eyes turned to see the brute trying to drag himself across the dirt, leaving a trail of blood from his shattered knee. Akira narrowed his eyes, crossing the distance in a few long strides and dropping into a crouch beside the bandit leader. He grabbed a fistful of the man's hair, wrenching his head back to stare into his hate-filled eyes. Where are the rest of your men holding up? Akira demanded in a low, dangerous tone. And what were your plans after extorting this village? The brute let out a wheezing chuckle, spraying bloody spittle. You think you've won, samurai? You're nothing but a dog of a dead era. A relic clinging to your precious honor while the world keeps turning. Akira's jaw tightened, giving the man's head a vicious shake. I will not ask again. Where are your men? What were your plans? We were just getting started, the bandit sneered, grinning to reveal broken, rotted teeth. After we had our fun with the village girls, we were going to burn this place to the ground and move on to the next. The brute's words were cut off as Akira's hand lashed out, backhanding him hard across the face and sending him sprawling. The young samurai rose to his feet, a look of disgust etched across his features. Then you will die knowing your men's ambitions amounted to nothing, Akira said, resting his hand on his katana's hilt. And the precious few who escaped will scatter back into the shadows like the rats they are. The bandit leader worked his jaw, glaring up at Akira defiantly. You may have stopped us here, samurai. But there are 100 more men like us waiting to take our place. The age of lords and bushido is dead, only chaos remains. Akira regarded the man for a long moment before slowly drawing his katana, the razor-sharp blade hissing against the lacquered wood of its sheath. He leveled the weapon at the brute's throat, the cold steel inches from his skin. Then I will bring order to the chaos, he said, his voice low but resonating with conviction. One bandit at a time. The village elder stepped forward, raising a hand. Peace, samurai. He has been beaten. To strike him further would only sully your honor. Akira did not respond, his intense gaze locked on the bandit leader. The tension was thick enough to cut with his blade. Finally, after several moments, he gave a slight nod and resheathed his sword. "You speak wisely, elder," he said, turning to face the old man. "I thank you for your counsel." The brute let out a mocking laugh that was abruptly cut off as Akira spun and drove the heel of his boot into the side of the man's head. The sickening crunch of bone preceded the bandit's body going limp and still. A shocked murmur rippled through the gathered villagers as Akira straightened, his expression unreadable. The elder opened his mouth, aghast, but the young samurai spoke first. "I will not apologize for dealing justice to a man who would gleefully murder and defile the innocent," Akira stated, his voice carrying clearly. His fate was sealed the moment he chose to walk the path of evil and dishonor. He turned his gaze to the villagers, letting it linger on each of their faces in turn. "You have all suffered greatly at the hands of these bandits. Families were torn apart, homes burned, lives taken senselessly. I regret that I could not have arrived sooner to prevent such tragedy." Akira's eyes finally came to rest on Kaya, holding her captivated stare. "But I vow to you all, I will not rest until every last member of this Crimson Butchers gang has been punished for their crimes. You have my word as a samurai." The young woman felt her breath catch in her throat as their eyes met. She gave a slight nod, her expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. The elder cleared his throat, regaining his composure as he addressed Akira once more. "You are most kind and just, samurai. But we are but a poor village, with little to offer in the way of reward for your heroic actions today." Akira shook his head, turning his attention back to the elder. "I require no reward, save for what provisions you can spare for my travels. My purpose is to help bring justice and honor back to these lands, that is payment enough." The old man furrowed his brow in thought for a moment before giving a slow nod of acquiescence. "Very well. We will gather what food and supplies we can spare to aid you on your journey. Though it shames me that we cannot provide more." "You honor me with your generosity," Akira replied with a respectful bow. He straightened and looked around at the villagers once more. He saw a group of weed plants in the distance, the elder noticing this offers to pack him up some weed with the supplies. "I must depart swiftly to hunt down the remnants of the Crimson Butchers while the trail is hot. But I vow to return one day, to ensure your village remains unthrashed by such men again." A few villagers began murmuring gratefully, while others still regarded the young samurai with a mixture of awe and wariness. Kaya found herself unable to tear her gaze away, feeling an unfamiliar stirring of emotion she did not fully understand. As if sensing her eyes upon him, Akira turned his head, locking eyes with the young woman once more. She felt her breath catch in her throat as their gazes met, her cheeks flushing slightly. The tender moment was broken as one of the village men approached, carrying a large bundle wrapped in simple cloth. "Samurai, we have gathered what little food and travel supplies we could spare," the villager said, offering the bundle to Akira with a deferential bow of his head. "We hope it will suffice to aid you on your quest for justice." Akira accepted the bundle with a solemn nod of thanks, carefully slinging it over his shoulder. "You have my deepest gratitude. I will make sure your provisions are put to good use, ensuring no more innocent villages suffer at the hands of dishonorable men." The young samurai turned, surveying the carnage and damage done to the village during the bandits' attack. His jaw clenched briefly before he addressed the crowd once more. "I must depart. But I will send word when I am able, to update you on my progress in hunting down the rest of the Crimson Butchers." With that, Akira gave one final bow to the elder before turning on his heel and starting down the main road leading out of the village. As he passed by the gathered villagers, many began bowing low in a show of respect for their savior. Kaya found herself unable to tear her eyes away from the mysterious Ronin's form as he walked away with such purpose and intensity. She had so many questions, so much she wanted to ask him about his origins and the path that led him here. But she remained silent, watching with a swirling mix of emotions until Akira's figure disappeared around a bend, leaving only the rising plume of smoke from the still smoldering village behind. The young woman's heart raced with a newfound sense of admiration and longing she did not fully understand. But one thing was certain, she knew their paths would cross again someday. Akira had changed her life, and the course of her destiny, forever on this day. And Kaya would never be the same.